Rajasthan, 2016. Delta Megwal, 17 years old. The daughter of humble craftsmen, the first in her community to enroll in Teachers College. She dreamed of becoming a teacher, to prove that even a girl from a poor family could study and inspire others. On the night of March 28th, she called her parents. She said the dormitory supervisor had ordered her to go to the physical education instructor's room to clean it. That same evening, she told her parents that the instructor had abused her. Her parents demanded action, but instead of helping, the college administration did nothing. They didn't call the police. They didn't suspend the man. They didn't even inform the family. On the contrary, Delta was forced to sign a letter of apology together with the man accused of assaulting her, as if it had all been a misunderstanding. The next morning, she was found lifeless on the college grounds. Administrators quickly declared it a tragic incident. The police didn't question witnesses, didn't draft the Panchnama, its official document meant to record every detail. Procedures were ignored. The report was filed only the next day, and officials called it a case of emotional distress. The investigation dragged on for years. Only after mass protests and public outrage, 6 years later, did the court finally convict 3 people for abuse and related offenses. How could something like this happen? The answer is brutally simple. The victim belonged to the lowest Dalit caste, while the attackers came from pure-blooded upper caste families. In the Indian justice system, their lives carry different weight by default. Here, a person's fate can be sealed before they even take their first breath. In India, it has a name, caste. It decides who you can marry, what work you can do, and even whom you're allowed to touch. It defines whether you're considered pure or polluted. India is a land of extremes. It has surpassed China in population and climbed global economic rankings, even overtaking its former colonizer, Britain. Ironically, in a country where people believe in reincarnation, most spend their entire lives trapped in one role, with no chance of rebirth here on Earth. Modern India isn't just meditation, yoga, and Goa beaches. Beyond the tourist routes live hundreds of millions of people who endure daily humiliation and fear, who can be shamed simply because of their last name. For them, getting an education, finding a job, or even sitting next to someone from an upper caste is still a struggle. Now think about it. Every 5th person on this planet lives within a system that dictates even what they can put on their plate. In the 21st century, it sounds like a relic of the past, but for millions, it's daily life.
India, the most spiritual country in the world. God is not here.
How do you explain the caste system to someone who has never lived in India? It's like trying to explain air to a fish. For most Indians, caste isn't a system. It's just like the weather, always here. Some people in India are born with the label privileged human being, while others, someone you shouldn't touch. Officially, India has over 3,000 castes and tens of thousands of subcastes. It's not even a pyramid. It's more like a labyrinth. Each group has its own traditions, taboos, even colors. A last name can tell more about you than a passport ever could. For example, Gandhi is a traditional surname of merchants. The irony is that the most famous Gandhi became the man who changed the country, not just sold spices, but exceptions only highlight how rigid the rule remains. Your occupation too is predetermined. Some families have ruled for generations, others have cleaned for generations. Imagine your grandfather herded cows, your father herded cows, and now you say, I want a code. And they tell you, code? The only thing you'll be programming is when the cows go to graze. It's not even about the job itself, it's that people can't see you as anything else. This giant social equation of thousands of castes actually boils down to 4 basic levels, the so-called Varnas. And according to legend, they were created by the god Brahma from his own body. From Brahma's head and mouth came the Brahmins, the clergy, the brain and the voice of society, priests, scholars, politicians, those who tell others how to live even when they don't follow their own advice. Next come the Kshatriyas, Brahma's arms, warriors, rulers, protectors of order, at least that was the idea. In practice, they're the ones with power and weapons, and therefore always a bit more right. Below them are the Vaishyas, Brahma's thighs, farmers, craftsmen, and merchants, the people who keep the country running, yet whose voices are rarely heard. And then come the Shudras, Brahma's feet, laborers, servants, those who literally carry civilization on their backs. And now, the main point. There are also those whom even Brahma forgot, the outcasts, the ones outside the system, the untouchables. Their place is beneath the floor of the social pyramid. They dealt with what others wouldn't touch, waste, corpses, any unclean work, and for that, they themselves were declared unclean. Hinduism, by the way, is deeply concerned with ritual purity, only somehow it always turned out that the purest were those who never touched dirt, even if someone else cleaned it for them. And there's one thing that destroys all the romance: love. Intercaste marriages are stories that often end badly. For many families, hearing "our son fell in love with a girl from another caste" is the same as hearing "he died." And sometimes that's literally what happens. Even food is marked by caste. The upper castes tend to be vegetarian because of traum purity. The lower ones don't have time for spiritual diets. They work from dawn to dusk and eat whatever keeps them standing. Ironically, the country that preaches non-violence is world famous for its chicken curry. People from different castes can work in the same industry, but never on the same level. Here's a modern analogy. The lowest test software, the middle ones write the code, the highest go to conferences to talk about innovation. In other countries, it's easier. Anyone can become a programmer, former bartenders, couriers, salesmen. In India, talent matters less than origin. You can change your job, but the system still remembers who your grandfather was. The same applies to schools and universities. The government is trying to fix the past, setting quotas for the lower castes to give a chance to those who were once banned from even entering a classroom, but inequality doesn't vanish that easily. The logic of the caste system is as simple as a microwave manual. The world works only when everyone stays in their place. Don't move, don't dream, don't break free. Try to break the system, and it'll chew you up and not even choke. Most people can't imagine another world. Mid-19th century India, the largest piece of the planet not yet owned by Europe. The Mughal Empire had collapsed, local princes were fighting over land, trade in spices and cotton was bringing enormous profits, and above it all already flew the British flag. The British East India Company had been helping, in quotes, Indians live better for 100 years, collecting taxes, exporting tea, and quietly conquering one principality after another. It wasn't a government, but a giant corporation with its own 300,000 strong army and the legal right to plunder under the British Crown. The British recruited Indians into its army and sent them around the world for pennies. But in 1857, India exploded. The Sepoy Rebellion, an uprising of Indian soldiers serving the British, began over something that seemed small. The British had greased rifle cartridges with pig and cow fat. For Muslims and Hindus, it was blasphemy. But in truth, it was the final straw. Decades of humiliation, unfair taxes, famine, and colonial arrogance erupted in violence. British garrisons wiped out entire cities while peasants hanged officials. In London, they called it a mutiny. In India, the First War of Independence. Thus was born British India, the empire's largest colony, the jewel in the crown, as they like to say in Westminster. And then began one of the most ambitious experiments in human history, the attempt to impose order on 500 million people who had lived by their own local chaotic rules for centuries. The British quickly realized that India was too complicated. Too many languages, too many gods, too many traditions, so they decided it must be classified. And so men in white suits arrived in villages with notebooks, rulers, and an unshakable belief that the universe could be described in a table. They set up their desks right in the marketplace, opened their forms, name, age, religion, caste, skull size, and wrote it all down. It sounds absurd now, but that's how the era of scientific racism began in India. Before colonialism, caste was a spiritual concept. It defined one's place in the cosmic order. Under the British, it became bureaucratic, like a note in a passport. Before the 19th century, the worst life was that of the untouchables, but the rest of the system was more fluid than it looks now. People could change professions, move, even marry outside their group. Then the British came, and as all good bureaucrats do, they brought order, in quotes. The British didn't invent caste, they just made it convenient. From a living, flexible system, they built a rigid vertical one, easier to control. When London looked at India, it didn't see people. It saw categories: loyal, rebellious, useful, dangerous. Queen Victoria carried the grand title Empress of India, and in London it sounded majestic. But the empire was held not by crowns, but by clerks and census forms. They merged caste with race to make exploitation look scientific. Brahmins were intelligent by nature, warriors born to rule, and everyone else born to serve. It was as if Darwinism met feudalism, and they decided to collaborate. India became a living laboratory experiment. The unreliable peoples were declared criminal under the so-called Criminal Tribes Act of 1871, which in colonial translation meant your DNA is your fault. People were hunted down, registered, and their children sent to reform camps. Entire villages were evicted simply because someone had once stolen something. The British listed them in reports as social anomalies. Those who survived were stripped of the right to own land. At the same time, the empire launched economic reforms. Land that once belonged to local communities was reassigned to reliable castes, Brahmins and loyal princes. Everyone else was left with taxes, and when famine struck southern India in 1876, millions starved to death while grain was exported to Britain. Official reports called it temporary supply difficulties. History calls it one of the largest man-made famines in the world. By the 20th century, it was clear something had to change. After everything India had endured, the rise of a national liberation movement was only a matter of time. As the British Empire began to crumble, India was preparing not only for independence, but for a deeper question. What will we do with the system that divides people into pure and impure? And out if that question, two voices emerged. The first, known around the world, Mahatma Gandhi, the man in a simple cloth who convinced humanity that nonviolence was stronger than bullets. The second, often mentioned only between the lines, was Bhimrao Ambedkar, a lawyer and philosopher from the so-called untouchable caste. In school, he wasn't allowed to touch the water pot when he was thirsty. Gandhi, by contrast, was born into a well-off family of merchants, raised in faith, humility, and self-discipline. Two Indians, two different castes, but both educated in Britain, both returning home as changed men. Gandhi experienced his awakening in South Africa when he was thrown off a train for refusing to give up his seat to a white man. Ambedkar's came in London when he realized that even with a prestigious diploma, he was still seen as that same low-born boy. Education hadn't washed away the stain of caste. Gandhi believed the world could be changed through goodness, show an example, awaken people's conscience, and things will gradually improve. Ambedkar saw it more soberly. He knew that goodness often served as a convenient excuse for those unwilling to change anything. He believed what was needed was power, not moral sermons. For Gandhi, the untouchables were children of God. For Ambedkar, they were people who needed dignity, not sacred nicknames. That's why Ambedkar publicly burned the Manusmriti, the ancient Hindu text that legitimized caste hierarchy. Gandhi called it blasphemy. You cannot fight hate with hate. Their confrontation became legendary when Ambedkar proposed creating separate electoral districts for the untouchables so they could elect their own representatives. Gandhi opposed it. He feared it would divide India by caste before the country even became independent. From his prison cell, he went on a hunger strike, a symbolic act meant to bring people together. But to Ambedkar, it was a moral blow that took away the only voice the voiceless had. Eventually, a compromise was reached. That's how the quota system appeared, reserving part of the seats in parliament and government institutions for the untouchables. The upper castes kept their power, while the lower ones were merely invited to play a game whose rules had long been set against them. When India finally gained independence, Gandhi became its face, the saintly symbol of moral strength, the man who led his people to freedom without violence. But the one who gave that freedom legal form was a different man entirely. Bhimrao Ambedkar, the former untouchable who had grown up in poverty and was now tasked with writing the constitution of a new nation. Symbolic, isn't it? He abolished untouchability, ending a system that had survived for over 1,500 years. On paper, everyone became equal, but in life, not quite. It's been more than 70 years since Ambedkar erased the word untouchability out of India's constitution, but, well, they signed the constitution, and then what? Today they're called Dalits, literally the broken ones. And perhaps that might be the most honest definition possible. There are about 200 million of them, a country within a country. In big cities, it might look like caste is a thing of the past, but within a neighborhood, and especially in a village, everyone more or less knows who belongs to which caste. But at the same time, you can't tell someone's caste just by looking at them. Hardly anyone wears traditional clothes anymore. In some villages, Dalits are allowed into temples because the law says so, but the next day, the priest performs a ritual purification.
Hey!
If someone from a lower caste gets into a dispute with someone from an upper caste, there's no mystery about who ends up in jail first. Every year, India records tens of thousands of caste-based crimes, over 160 per day on average. Now imagine how many crimes never even make it into those statistics. One of the most horrifying cases of violence against Dalits happened in the state of Maharashtra, in the village of Kairlanji. Dalit woman and her children lost their lives in a mob attack. They were targeted by neighbors after a dispute escalated into violence. Their only crime was refusing to give up their land to members of a so-called higher caste. Police initially dismissed the killings as a family dispute. The truth came out only after Dalit activists organized massive protests across the country. Later, 8 men were convicted of murder. Another case, a police officer bragged on video how she teaches Dalits a lesson through beatings and fabricated charges. She wasn't fired, just transferred. A year later, she was promoted. There are villages where caste divisions can be seen from a drone. The Dalit houses are at the bottom of the settlement, closer to the drains so that the filth doesn't flow uphill. This year in Tamil Nadu, there was a shocking case. A 27-year-old IT worker lost his life in a brutal public attack right in the middle of the street, all because he was in a relationship with a woman from a higher caste. The killer turned out to be her brother. There are thousands of such stories. Police reports label them as domestic disputes, and that's the end of it. If a Dalit man stands at the very bottom of society, then a Dalit woman stands even lower. Her life is a triple sentence: wrong caste, poverty, and womanhood. Indian news often reads like an endless chronicle of horror, with stories of women exploited, mistreated, or blackmailed. According to the National Crime Bureau, the majority of reported assaults against Dalit women are sexual in nature. Last year in Rajasthan, 3 police officers were charged with assaulting a minor Dalit girl. In Ahmedabad, police refused even to file a report for a 15-year-old victim until the media intervened. In some regions, certain castes have been historically tied to prostitution. In the village of Gaoli, near Delhi, women from several lower castes earn their living through what's still politely called a tradition, though everyone knows what it really means. Under such deep-rooted pressure, the birth of a girl is still seen as misfortune. Official estimates say over 1 million abortions a year in India, are done simply because the child is female. And yet, in the same villages where girls are unwanted, they're also seen as capital, a future source of income. Some are forced into exploitative, traditional practices at a very young age. A 2024 survey found that over 70% of respondents from upper castes said they wouldn't allow their child to be friends with a Dalit. Half admitted they wouldn't even shake one's hand. The government, of course, is trying to fix history. It introduced quotas in universities, parliament, and public service. I mean, this was meant to be a social elevator. Today, India is officially divided not by castes, but by 5 social categories out of every 100 people. And 21 are from the forward castes. Educated, wealthy, politically connected. 42 belong to the other backward classes. 22 are Dalits, the so-called scheduled castes. 10 belong to the scheduled tribes, and the remaining 5 are religious minorities or those outside the caste system. The numbers look balanced until you look at the money. Upper castes, who make up only about a quarter of India's population, control over 40% of the nation's total wealth. Real money and real jobs lie in the private sector. And there, if your caste isn't the right one, you won't even get past the gate. Even if a Dalit manages to get a job, there's no guarantee they'll ever rise higher. Top management is reserved for the upper castes. The state provides only basic education, a few years of school. Everything beyond that costs money. Universities, technical colleges, all require tuition. That's why among doctors, engineers, and professors, Dalits are almost absent. Even when the opportunity exists, parents often can't afford to let their children study full-time. The family must work or they won't survive. Education levels among lower castes have risen actually thanks to scholarships and government aid. Life has improved somewhat, but this progress came not from equality, but from economic growth. When the country gets richer, even the poor get a few more crumbs. In India, cleanliness isn't quite what we mean by it. There, it's more about spiritual purity than hygiene. Many people still believe the toilet is an unclean place, so it shouldn't be near the kitchen or inside a home where you pray. That's why even today, millions of people still go outside because that's what's been considered proper for generations. According to UNICEF, just a few years ago, over 500 million Indians were still defecating in the open. The government's been trying to fix it. For example, Prime Minister Modi launched the Swachh Bharat, or Clean India, campaign, and they built over 100 million toilets across the country. But a lot of people still refuse to use them, saying it's impure. And it's not just poor villagers, even educated families, even Brahmins sometimes go out into the fields because, well, it feels cleaner. All of this costs India a fortune. The World Bank estimates that poor sanitation drains up to 6% of the country's GDP every year. It's crazy to think that a belief born out of religion centuries ago still shapes how people live and where they go to the bathroom in the 21st century. But problem isn't just about beliefs or habits, it's also about basic infrastructure. In most villages, people rely on public toilets because private ones are a luxury few can afford, but those community toilets often have no running water, no sewage connection, and no one to clean them. So even when the government builds new facilities, people quickly stop using them. The toilets don't flush, smell terrible, or overflow because no one maintains them. But who's supposed to clean when cleaning itself is impure work? A person from an upper caste won't become a sweeper. That would lower them to the level of the untouchables, so the streets are quite literally covered in filth. Yes, things are changing. Some Dalits have rebranded themselves as cleaning company employees, wearing uniforms, ID badges, and having an official salary. It looks like progress, but seat that worker at the same table with a client and you'll see how quickly old instincts revive. Even when an Indian becomes Prime Minister of Britain, the first thing people Google isn't his policies, but his caste. If you're curious, Brahmin. And no, he doesn't eat beef. By the way, it's caste segregation that keeps India from becoming a true superpower. The economy is booming, the population is larger than all of Europe combined, and the IT sector is exploding. But as long as the country divides itself not into rich and poor, but into pure and impure, there can be no real unity. In some parts of India, caste still matters more than any political platform or economic promise.